Yo, 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 what's going on, guys? Quinn69 here. Today I'm going to be bringing you guys a guide on how to squeeze every last little bit of damage out of your character. We're going to explain damage to you guys. I mean, it's a pretty broad subject, but I'm going to kind of convey to you guys the most important aspects. We're going to explain the mechanics of damage and how it really works. And we're going to show you how stacking multipliers can be a bad thing, or like not as good as what you think. So yeah, let's get right into it. I've got some examples prepared for you right now, so let's get right into it now, boys. Let's get right into it now. Okay, so this might look a little bit like, oh my god, what the hell, this guy's in paint, what is going on here? Let's try and explain to you what the heck this is and what it means and what all this is. So let's say you're dealing 100 damage. You're dealing 100 damage, boys. That's all you need to know. You're dealing 100 damage, but you've got 20% fire damage on your gear, boys. You got 20% fire damage on your gear. So now, instead of dealing 100 damage, you do 120. So that's a total increase of 20%. Simple as, right? Simple as. Simple as. Too easy, boys. Too easy. Okay, so now you're chilling out. You're walking around the Diablo 3s, and you found another upgrade. Now this upgrade here, boys, this upgrade here is another 20% fire damage. So now you went from 20 to 40. So now you've gone from 120 damage to 140. So that's a 20% damage increase, right? It's not, boys, it's not. It's only a 16.6 relative damage increase. So you're not getting less from the elemental damage, but relatively, so you're from what you're at before, so you went from 120 to 140, relatively, the 20% is worth less. So now you're only getting 16.6. So let's go down to this example here. So now you went from 40 to 60% fire damage, guys. You went from 40 to 60. So now you went from 140 to 160. So the difference between these two numbers here is only a 14.2% increase. This is not because the numbers are diminishing that this is happening. This is just looking at relative increase. So now let's see. Okay, so you're asking yourself, how can I use this to kind of min-max my damage? How can I use this information? So we know that every time we add more damage relative to what we were before, every time we add additive damage, it's worth less in each instance. So now, how can we use this to kind of work out, like, how can we apply this knowledge? So you have some Nemesis braces equipped, boys. You've got some Nemesis braces equipped. They have 20% fire damage, so you're sitting at 20% fire damage right now. And you're looking at two amulets. Okay, you're looking at these two amulets right here. You're looking at these two amulets. Okay, one is an 18% sheet increase, so you get 18% damage, right? You've got 18% damage, dexterity, crit, cool. This other one is a negative 18% sheet increase, but a plus 20% fire damage increase. But you've already got 20% fire damage, and as we know, if you've got 20% fire damage, the next relative increase of fire damage is only going to be worth 16.6. So the damage increase of this amulet on the left is less than the amulet on the right in this situation. But let's say, okay, you found some different braces, and you're not using these ones, so you've just lost your 20% fire damage. So now you've got 0% fire damage. Now, in this case, you're losing negative 18% damage, but you're gaining 20% fire damage, which we know is now, because you got no fire damage, that is a true 20% damage increase. So now the pair on the left is an upgrade. And that's what you've got to try and understand, and how you're going to work out. So once you understand this kind of concept, you'll kind of work out how relatively, like how kind of effective diminishing returns works, because it's not actually diminishing. It's not actually diminishing. You're not actually diminishing your gear. So like, if you were at 100 damage and you went to 160, that's 100. That's a 60% increase. But relatively, if you were looking at it from a relative point of view, in sections of gear or pieces of gear, if you're looking at it piece by piece, then yes, it does make a difference and it does matter. And a lot of people will argue this, but once you kind of understand how it works, we'll kind of show you. This graph will hopefully kind of show you guys. This graph here will hopefully kind of show you guys what I mean. So each 20% you add, the less and less and less effective it becomes. You can kind of see there. This is kind of taken to a little bit of an extreme, but not really, because I mean, we'll show you another example right now, which will kind of make it make a lot more sense. Okay, so like, let's give you one last example here let's give you one other example here. Let's give you another example here. So, Dexterity. It's a multiplier, guys. It's a multiplier. So you were at 100 Dexterity, you increase it to 200 Dexterity. It's a 100% increase. At 200, increase it to 300. It's now only a 50% increase. 400, 300, 33, 25, 20. So you guys are seeing, and this applies to every single multiplier in the game. Every single multiplier in the game. So let's try and explain to you guys now how you can utilize this information to kind of your advantage. So let's just show you another thing. Let's show you another thing. This is kind of different. This is now we're moving on to like a different kind of example and everything right now. We're kind of moving on to a little bit different, but this will all make sense once we've fully explained. So when people a common mistake when people are looking at gear is they think they're like, okay, so they'll look at a weapon and they'll see this giant number here, this giant number. Let's get my paintbrush out. Let's get this paintbrush. Let's put some red band. And look at this number here. It's useless. Don't look at this number. Don't look at it. Don't, just look away, guys. Look away. It's disgusting number. Disgusting number. We're not worried about that number. That number doesn't mean anything. That number does not mean anything. This is the number here. This number right here, guys. This is the one which we're worried about. The 3,120 to 4,554 damage. This is where all your abilities scale from. This is where all your ability scales from. This big number up the top here is just all that big number is. That is just getting multiplied by attack speed. So that's just useless attack speed. And because all of the strongest monk builds, or it doesn't have to be about monks, all of the strongest builds that are based around resource are always going to scale better with a slower weapon, with more weapon damage, not weapon DPS. Weapon DPS is different to weapon damage, and let's kind of explain to you how weapon damage works. So to find out how good a weapon is, what you want to do is you want to get the two damage ranges. So you get 3,120, and you want to plus it by 4,544, so the other value, then divide it by 2, and that will give you the average weapon damage range there. So that'll give you, so averagely, this is going to do 3,823 damage every time you use it, so on average. And let's kind of compare the staff here. Let's compare the staff to, say, a slower weapon like a furnace. So furnaces, by default, with no attack speed, they have 1 attack speed. This has attack speed, so it's at 1.07. And let's kind of look at the damage range. So we're not worrying about this. This is not, we don't care about this. So you can see that this 4,500 is much lower than the 4,600 or 4,700 that the torch was. Much lower. But we're not looking at that. We're looking at this. We are looking at this number here, boys. We're looking at this number right here. So now we get the 3,941 plus it to the 4,622 divided by 2. This gives us an average weapon damage range of 4,281 compared to this other Diablo, which had a way higher weapon DPS, but the average weapon damage range is actually much lower. So whenever you use an exploding palm with this weapon, it's basing it off this damage here, which is lower than this one here, even though it's got a higher DPS, even though the DPS is higher in this weapon. So that's something we've got to understand. So now how can we use this number? I can actually show you guys how this number is calculated and how we can fully min-max these numbers right now. Okay, so someone to subscribe to me off stream. That's awkward. Someone to subscribe to me off stream. Okay, so that's weird. I don't know why would you subscribe off? Why wouldn't you wait until I'm streaming until you subscribe? That's kind of weird. Okay, thank you for the sub though. Thank you. Shout out to that guy for subbing. But let's kind of show you guys now. How can we? So look. So you know how we're talking about. So this is the min damage. This is the max damage, and this is the average. So this is just the average of the two. So this is 3.2. And now this is the value that we're worried about. This is what scales all of your abilities here. So now how do we get from this 3.2 to this 4 million? Let's go through it. Let's show you guys how we get that number. All it is it's this number multiplied by your dexterity, multiplied by your average crit, multiplied by your elite damage, multiplied by your elemental damage, multiplied by your additive damage. So this is all. So this is like, I call it additive damage. You can call it whatever you want. This is just, fire allied determination, unity, you know, Taeguk, strong arms, everything. This all stacks, you know, and we talked about stacking damage and how you get a reduced effect. So like, I see it happening all the time. People think, oh, I'm going to get Unity and I'm going to get, you know, I'm going to get Momentum and I'm going to get Taeguk and I'm going to get this. And like, oh, look, Unity's much better because it gives me a 20% damage increase. But really, it's not a 20% damage increase because, you know, we discussed before, you know, with this graph here, every time you stack a bit of additive damage, the overall damage increase becomes less. So the talent says increases damage by 20%, but really you're somewhere down here, and it's really not even increasing. It's only the 20% is actually only 11%. So you know it's kind of like you're misjudging the value of abilities, and you could be choosing other things like defensive talents or other talents that will have more use. So it's additive damage. Then we've got special. So I've got the special. This is like Bane of the Trapped. So this is another separate multiplier. That's why this is, so you're multiplying this average damage range by the dexterity, by the crit, by the elite, elemental, additive. Then the Bane of the Trapped. Even Zaystone is a multiplier. Even Mythic Rhythm, it's a monk talent. It's a multiplier. Other things like if you're a demon hunter, like sentry damage is a multiplier. But for monks, things like Wave of Light damage is just additive. Things like Exploding Palm is just additive, which is kind of unfortunate, but whatever. Anyway, so that's how you get this number. So it's just this thing multiplied by all of these. So now you can ask yourself, how can I utilize that information to my advantage? How can I utilize that information to my advantage? So let's give you guys an example here. So say you have, I don't know, a couple of setups. One setup, you can have elemental damage increased by 60%. So, you know, you've got 60% elemental damage. Or say you could use another setup which has 60% elite damage, right? So 60% elite damage or 60% elemental damage. So they're just multipliers, and they both work out to the exact same thing. But what happens, guys, what happens if we get this elite damage and say we shift, instead of having 60% in elite, say we shift that down to 30, so we cut it in half, but we shift that 60%, we shift it into elemental. What happens if we do that? So now we've got, instead of having 60 in one, we've got 30 in both, and then we have a total damage, base damage. So remember, this base damage is what all your skills are based off, of 4 million versus before when we had a base damage of, so when we had 60 in one, so before we had one of 3.8. So we just gained, you know, 200k damage just by shifting them into, you know, just by shifting the multipliers out. And now you're gonna ask yourself, okay, so that's cool. So we balance elite and elemental. That's easy enough. We can do that. How else can we utilize this? How else can we do this? So we shift these out, increase that. Another way of shifting stats out is by, okay, so not stacking too many of these. You don't want to stack too many additive damage. If you stack them, they become, I mean, it is going to be a damage increase, don't get me wrong, but the more you stack, the less value you get, and you're probably better off picking up other talents that are, say, you know, useful, like a movement speed or harmony for defensives, or like Sixth Sense defense, you know, utility talents over just stacking additive damage, because as we know, you know, the more we stack, the less effective it becomes. And using gems like Bane of the Trapped, because this is a multiplier, or Zaystone, because this is a multiplier. Or say, another good example is, you know, when we start having a lot of dexterity, you know, the more and more dexterity we get, the less value it has. So what you could do is, say, roll dexterity off one of your rings and shift some of that insane stacked dexterity and shift it into crit. So for instance, on jewelry, roll dexterity off your rings and have crit socket instead of dexterity crit socket, you know, like for Unity, for example. And that's another way of shifting and spreading out the multipliers. The more you can spread it out, the more you can, you know, the more damage you're going to do with your abilities. Because all your abilities are, so Wave of Light, 7100, because it's multiplied by 5 because of some Wuku set. 7100% multiplies this number. So you can see how weapon damage is huge, because remember, this is the base weapon damage. This average damage is what everything else multiplies off. So increasing weapon damage, so having a weapon damage roll with really good damage is huge. And spreading out your multipliers is huge. And attack speed is like, so we can have, say you could put like your attack speed, say we had item attack speed of, say we had 9,000, like 9 million, it doesn't matter. Whatever attack speed we put in there, it doesn't matter. It's not going to increase the damage of a Wave of Light. We're not worried because we're a monk, or like, it doesn't matter. Say you're a demon hunter and you're just spending resources. We're not worried about attack speed. We're worried about how efficient we can be with our resources. So to round it up, guys, it's about spreading multipliers, not stacking them. You know, it's about looking at the weapon damage and you know, not looking at the weapon DPS, looking at the damage range and then properly assessing. You know, it's like it's about looking at items and then understanding, you know, relative reduction and then making the right choices on what is an upgrade and what isn't an upgrade. So hopefully we've kind of, you know, got these points through to you guys. Hopefully we've got the points through to you guys. You know, if I don't know, I've tried my hardest. But if you have any questions, or whatever, you know, leave them in the comments or come to my Twitch page. That is twitch.tv/Quinn69. And then if you have any questions or whatever, come straight there, ask me, and I'll do my best to answer it if I can. But otherwise, boys, hopefully you enjoyed the guide. And hopefully I didn't mess it up too much. Otherwise, have a good one, boys. I shall see you next time.